In November 2007, following England's disastrous Euro 2008 qualifying campaign that saw them fail to qualify for the tournament, the FA took the decision to sack Steve McClaren as manager. At the time, he was the shortest tenured manager in the history of the England national team, and as such, the FA were determined to not repeat their previous mistakes. Both McClaren and Eriksson that came before him were deemed to have been too lax, too informal, and too nice. The FA had a list of requirements to fill the vacancy, but at the very top of the list was a strict disciplinarian. The previous administrations have been criticised heavily for allowing the players to have too much power. The perceived golden generation was majorly underperforming their talent, and managers such as Luis Felipe Scolari and Marcelo Lippi, who had just won major international tournaments, were known for being frank in their demands and for immense tactical organisation, both of which the FA felt they were missing. At the top of the shortlist was a man who had taken England by storm since first arriving in the country in 2004, causing avalanches to the status quo in the Premier League. That man was the recently dismissed Jose Mourinho, who had been sacked as Chelsea manager in the September of that year. On paper, he ticks all the boxes. He was a man with clear identity, a high-profile figure, a man who had managed many of the England players at club level to major success, but unfortunately for the FA, history was about to repeat itself. He was flattered, of course, but ultimately, he didn't want to leave club football at this stage of his career. And with that, they went back to the drawing board. Martin O'Neill had been a name linked previously, but despite his considerations, the FA passed up on him. Marcelo Lippi would be a great name, having just won the 2006 World Cup, but he wished to remain on his break from coaching that he had been on for just over a year. How about a return for Scolari? Well, his rebuff of their advancements before had left a rather sour taste in the mouths of the FA hierarchy. But there was one option that jumped out. A man who was known for being incredibly strict in his pursuit of success, a man who had won many trophies across both Spain and Italy, and best yet, he was brazen with his honesty that he wanted the England job. That man was former AC Milan, Juventus and Real Madrid manager Fabio Capello. Just a day after McClaren's sacking, he told the Italian TV station RAI that he was attracted to the job, and within 3 weeks, he was appointed. Intrigue was well and truly piqued with this bold choice from the English FA, and the first press conference at Wembley Stadium saw many statements made. First, it was made clear that Capello did not speak English fluently, relying on a translator to communicate with the media. Attention soon turned towards the captaincy, unsurprising given McClaren's swift removal of the armband from David Beckham in one of his first acts, but Capello was willing to be softer in this approach, stating how he would assess different candidates in his squad before making a decision. He later went on to quickly intercept lines of questioning regarding player power, instead turning the script onto the team being a group and not a series of individuals. The aftermath of this press conference was divided, to say the least. Whilst many respected Capello's calls for discipline and the success he had previously achieved, there were concerns over his lack of fluency in the language, which was only exacerbated by him also bringing in an all-Italian backroom staff, which led some to question whether the culture he aimed to bring to the English game would be welcomed by the players. But whether the players were going to be welcoming or not, Capello was unfazed. He knew the task he had in hand and sought to enact his master plan. This began with the banning of multiple items and traditions. Firstly, he banned England players from choosing who they roomed with. Previously, players had the choice, but many felt it led to cliques within the camp, and Capello swiftly moved to undo this. Next was the banning of ketchup and butter, a staple for many England players in the past. Capello expected his players to follow a strict high-protein, low-fat diet. Shirt swapping at half-time was also high on the agenda of the Italian, who quickly banned this practice moving forward. Up next was the banning of speaking to the media about tactics or team selection. England had a poor record for leaks in the past, and Capello sought to stamp this out pronto. The attire of the players was also remedied. Players were expected to suit up for team meetings, and the wearing of flip-flops outside the dressing room was banned by Capello to maintain professionalism. And lastly was the banning of unauthorised visitors to the team hotel. which to be fair had been a major plague on this England team in the 2006 World Cup, where the wags of the players were perceived to have been a contributing factor to the Three Lions' underperformance. It cannot be understated here how drastic these changes were to the culture of previous England regimes, but it would all be in vain unless results improves on the pitch. With England missing out on qualification to Euro 2008, it gave Capello 9 months until his first competitive World Cup qualifier, allowing time to figure out how he was going to build this team. His first match would come in February of 2008, a friendly with one of the two hosts for the upcoming Euros, Switzerland, at Wembley. Two notable omissions were noted in his first squad that saw David Beckham miss out, leaving him on 99 caps and uncertain if the 100th would ever come, and Paul Robinson, long-term England number 1 whose form had waned in recent times. England would line up in a 4-5-1 with David Bentley occupying Beckham's right wing spot instead, and 37-year-old David James back in behind the sticks. Goals from Jermaine Genius and Sean Wright-Phillips, who made an instant impact upon being subbed on, saw England win their first match under Capello by 2-1. The following month saw Capello face a tougher test as England visited France. Joe Hart received his first senior call-up at just 20 years old, but it was the return of David Beckham, hoping to win a centurion of England caps, that was top-line news. In the match, Beckham would start on the right side of a 4-2-3-1, but England were frustrated by a French side who seemed to easily control proceedings, easing to a 1-0 win for a Franck Ribéry penalty. Lessons would have to be learned going forward, and one change that Capello enacted following this match was to ditch the one striker, as he believed Rooney needed someone to play off to succeed, instead opting for a 4-4-2. Friendlies with the United States and Trinidad and Tobago followed just after the conclusion of the 2007-08 season, with routine victories for the Three Lions, but some fans had yet to note a discernible difference between the football being played now and what was played under Steve McClaren. One final friendly came before the beginning of the 2010 World Cup qualification process as England took on Czech Republic. Ahead of the fixture, John Terry was reinstated as permanent England captain after Capello had trialled his options. In spite of a good first half, England found themselves 2-1 down in the second, their blushes only spared by a last-minute Joe Cole equaliser that didn't do much to lighten the mood of the fans. However, inside the camp, signs seemed rather strong that the players were beginning to trust Capello's methods and understand his expectations of them. John Terry stated, "With Capello you know exactly where you stand. If you aren't playing well, you're out. But if you work hard and perform, you had a place." This raised the levels within the camp and promoted competition for places amongst the pros. However, there was always a lack of personality with Fabio. He was cold, he didn't put his arms around the players, in fact he only really spoke to them when he had to. So there was a mood of respect for this coach, but not love, and it would have to be pondered whether this relationship could withstand such little emotion. England were drawn into UEFA Group 6 for qualification to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, pitting themselves alongside Andorra, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and the thorn in their side for 2008 qualification, Croatia. Yes, the team that had denied them a place at Euro 2008 would return to attempt to cause them more qualification concerns, and they would have to play them in the first international window after England's opening tie away at Andorra. Andorra were also present in their previous qualifying group under McClaren, and history seemed to be repeating itself as England went into the half-time break drawing 0-0 to a cacophony of boos from their supporters. Joe Cole's introduction in the second half rescued a potential embarrassment with 2 quick second half goals. Crisis averted. Next though was the big one. The opposition was so feared that even though it was just the second qualifying match of 10, it was seen as the biggest obstacle of the whole group. However, if fans couldn't notice any improvement from their side under Capello, they did after this match, as England obliterated Croatia in Zagreb with their teenage sensation Theo Walcott scoring a hat-trick from right wing. Fans could barely believe their eyes as the Three Lions had dropped one of their greatest performances in years against such a feared opponent. Following this up in October of 2008 was the welcoming of Kazakhstan before a midweek trip to Belarus. Anticipation was high after England's previous stunning performance on their return to Wembley, but when the match was once again at a stalemate as the half-time whistle sounded, boos returned to the ears of England players. Capello, who had been diligently learning English, showcased his growing language repertoire as he donned the famous footballing phrase of a game of two halves in the post-match, referring to England's onslaught in the second half, which saw them win by 5-1, which may have flattered them just a little. To round out Capello's first year in charge of the Three Lions was a trip to Belarus, where England delivered another convincing away victory, winning the match 3-1 with Rooney netting a brace. The road to qualifying they were on. To begin 2009 though was a double of friendlies, away to Spain and at home to Slovakia. This went pretty much as expected as Del Bosque's men showed their level, dispatching of England 2-0 before England returned the lesson to Slovakia by comfortably defeating them 4-0 at Wembley. But the real test to come was Ukraine, the team that sat behind England in Group 6. Now I'm going to pivot here and attempt to frame the mood inside England at this moment, in not just football, in not just sport, but in general too. The 2008 global financial crisis rocked Britain to its institutional core. The economy had shrunk over 6% as unemployment rose greatly. Fortunately, by 2009, the economy began to recover somewhat and the mood of the nation began to lift. Meanwhile, British sport saw a seismic uptick and was heading into a golden era of its own. Major successes at the 2008 Summer Olympics saw Team GB climb to 4th on the medals table, up 6 places from 2004 to secure their best finish ever. Elsewhere, England triumphed in the Ashes over Australia in 2009 in a major victory. Andy Murray's flourishing career in tennis gave Britain their best hope for a Wimbledon winner in decades. Titles for Englishmen Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button in the Formula 1, ending the Schumacher era, were revered. With the 2012 Olympics being held in London to come, the appetite for British sport was growing greater and greater. However, football is this nation's most beloved sport. So when England was showing signs of greatness in qualification for the 2010 World Cup, anticipation was at its magnum opus. Now around the same time, James Corden had written and starred in the BBC smash comedy series Gavin and Stacey as the character Smithy, a larger-than-life plumber from Essex. His profile had grown exponentially from 2007, leading to his celebrity status skyrocketing and him creating numerous sketches with various British sportsmen and women in aid of UK charity Comic Relief. This also included skits with the England team where Smithy in character berated the England team for previous underperformance and offered his advice on how they could turn it around. Even Fabio Capello was willing to get involved to help raise funds for charity. This culminated in the full circling taking place during England's 5th World Cup qualifier with Ukraine. As Crouch opened the scoring, he pulled out the rope in celebration, a move he had learned off of Smithy, and when Terry won it late on, the players did a haircut celebration in reference to Smithy telling them to stop messing around with the hairstyles. Now I understand this probably all seems incredibly trivial, and I'll admit, this is probably one of my strangest segues to date, but it did paint a picture of the optimism and buoyancy surrounding this England side. When England failed to qualify for Euro 2008, the nation was down on its luck, the economy was collapsing and success in sport seemed a dream too far. But by 2009, the economy had turned, this England team looked far improved and was winning often. And suddenly the mood between the players and the fans was one of real hope again. Better days were to come and maybe, just maybe, England were going to not only qualify for the 2010 World Cup, but maybe this Italian Fabio Capello was going to lead them to glory again, as was being seen in many other sports that Britain and England were competing in at that time. England beat Ukraine 2-1 by the way, 5 wins out of 5, go on the boys. Kazakhstan and Andorra would follow in the June, where 2 rousing victories which saw 10 goals scored and 0 conceded saw England extend their record to 7 wins from 7 in their group. In September, England had a chance to secure qualification if they could beat Croatia at Wembley. England had destroyed the Blazers in Zagreb, but the memories of Croatia overturning a 2-0 English lead to banish their chances of Euro 2008 qualification was still hot in the memory. But Capello's side were flying, and they didn't let up here. A 5-1 demolition of a nation that had broke their hearts 2 years earlier was the perfect tonic, as a rare smile was seen from Fabio, whilst Bilic, who had overseen one of his greatest triumphs at Wembley, looked solemn. England had qualified for South Africa 2010 in the most calculated, most bloodthirsty way, destroying all their opponents in sight with 2 games to spare. Their hopes of a perfect record would be dashed in a 1-0 away defeat to Ukraine in the next match, where Rob Green was sent off early for a mistimed challenge, but nevertheless the confidence of the group was soaring. Capello's merit-based selection policy continued to throw up surprises though, as Rio Ferdinand found himself dropped from the England squad for the final 2 qualifying matches. As the Three Lions headed into 2010, optimism was soaring through the minds of fans and pundits alike. Friendly wins over Egypt, Mexico and Japan pre-tournament continued to garner greater hope. The form of Wayne Rooney was electric heading into the World Cup, with the Manchester United forward notching 34 goals in the 09-10 season, with belief that a fully fit Rooney could fire England to glory, having been deeply unfit 4 years earlier in Germany. However, that's not to say there weren't underlying concerns too. The greatest of these was John Terry losing the captaincy of his nation in February of 2010 following an illicit affair with his teammate's wife, Wayne Bridge, the ultimate betrayal of a man he had lined up next to countless times before. This led to rumours of a dressing room divide following the revelation, but in spite of the controversy, Capello continued to call him up to his roster. Instead, Rio Ferdinand would take the armband, only for bad luck to strike twice, as he was ruled out injured leading up to the tournament, leading to Steven Gerrard being given the responsibility instead. Lastly, it was unclear who Capello would pick as his starting goalkeeper, having rotated between Rob Green and David James persistently. In the end, the Italian's choice would prove to be a mistake. The squad was chosen ahead of the tournament, with a few surprises mixed in. Jamie Carragher was called up, U-turning on his previous decision to retire from the national side 3 years earlier. Joe Cole had been left out in the cold for most of Capello's reign, but following intense media pressure, the Italian added him to his squad. And lastly, hat-trick hero in Zagreb, Theo Walcott, was left home in favour of Aaron Lennon and Sean Wright-Phillips. In terms of the group, the overwhelming feeling was that England had landed a blinder, with themselves being drawn alongside Algeria, Slovenia and the United States in Group C. Newspaper The Sun went further on this, splashing their back page with the word easy. As England went into their opening match with the United States, publicly the players painted a picture of joy and excitement, but behind the scenes, tensions began to flare within the camp at Capello's strict discipline. Ruling with an iron fist, the Italian banned personal contact with families and limited free time for the players, which many players have since spoken out and said it badly affected morale. Capello's decision to delay the announcement of his starting keeper led to nerves amongst the squad, with Green subsequently being chosen, to the surprise amongst many of the England players. Lastly, Rooney had been thriving in a 4-3-3 at Man United in the lead up to the tournament and was frustrated with the lack of attacking fluidity in Capello's rigid 4-4-2 system. Regardless though, the tournament was here, Capello's first as England manager, and the challenge of the United States was up first. As 38,000 packed into the stadium in Rustenburg, many of whom were back in England for success, it was to be all left on the field for this 90-minute encounter. And the Three Lions, the topic of so much discussion leading into the World Cup, got off to a perfect start. As 4 minutes in, Heskey teed up stand-in captain Steven Gerrard, who netted to send his nation off to a flyer. It's just a shame that so many back home missed it. Yes, ITV, who had the broadcasting rights to this one in the United Kingdom, suffered a major transmission fault as the channel accidentally and inexplicably cut to adverts right as Gerrard fired England ahead. When the broadcast returned, many viewers were utterly bemused to see England ahead on the scoreboard, having completely missed the goal. As the first half wore on, England's play was slow and lethargic, failing to carve out many chances until the 40th minute, when tragedy struck. A speculative effort from Clint Dempsey looked to be a routine save for Green, who got down to save, but the ball rolled off his gloves and through his legs into the net for a United States equaliser, marking one of the worst goalkeeping moments the World Cup has ever seen. This blunder seemed to lead to a complete collapse in confidence for England, as in the second half they mustered very little in the way of efforts as the match ran out in a score draw. It wasn't panic stations for the Three Lions yet, but their hopes of a blazing start was thwarted with Capello left to try and pick up the pieces. Next up would be Algeria, appearing at their first World Cup since Mexico '86. Their start had also proven to be poor, having been defeated by a 0-0 by Slovenia, meaning they needed a result versus England to keep their hopes alive. Frustration continued to be written all over the face of Rooney in the lead up, whilst goalkeeper uncertainty remained as fans were unsure if Capello would stick with Green or switch to one of David James or Joe Hart. In the end, Capello's decision to stick or twist landed on the twist option, as David James was named in his starting lineup versus the African nation. However, the hopes that a change of goalkeeper would lead to a change of fortune were dashed in this one, as once again England's attacking struggles were firmly in the spotlight as Algeria held the Three Lions to a 0-0 draw. Frustration had led to anger on the face of Wayne Rooney, who failed to get reliable service all night, resulting in this infamous outburst from the talismanic number 9.
Nice to see your whole fans booing you. That's what Borough supporters.
As much as Capello tried to front up to the disdain in the post-match press conference, it seemed more and more that the Italian was losing his dressing room support that had made England so feared in qualifying. Their final match versus Slovenia would be decisive. The Three Lions had to beat their European counterparts to stay in the tournament. With 2 draws from 2 and the hopes and expectations of so many dampened, John Terry threw fuel on the fire when he challenged Capello's leadership publicly. The Italian had told his players that communications were only allowed if agreed by his management team, but Terry ignored this by holding a press conference of his own against his leader's wishes. Now, to be fair to the Chelsea captain, his words in this press conference were pretty tame, all things considered. He defended his teammates and called on fans for greater support instead of the boos they had been roundly receiving. However, the authoritarian Fabio Capello saw Terry's actions as a challenge to his authority and reflected the deepening issues within the England camp. In spite of this, Terry remained in the starting 11, although with Ledley King ruled out injured and Carragher suspended, the Italians' hands were largely tied. Capello would also keep the faith with his 4-4-2 despite swaths of pressure to switch to a 4-3-3 as Defoe replaced Heskey next to the dismayed Rooney. The decision would prove to be pivotal as the pacey forward scored the only goal in their somewhat improved performance over Slovenia. Blushes had been spared, both France and Italy had capitulated in the group stage, but England did just enough to squeeze through in second place, missing out on top spot through goal difference, having only scored twice in their opening 3 matches. However, any hopes of an easy draw were dashed as Germany rampaged through their group, meaning it was the old enemy who would be the team to face in the last 16. In the lead up to their awaited Germany clash, the England team locked in. The problems that had plagued their camps were pushed aside to focus on the only thing that mattered, the next match. For all of England's problems, knockout football can bring nations alive. France were utter toilet in the 2006 World Cup group stage and recovered to reach the final. Could England do the same? Well, the first half was nothing but Germany pressure. As much as England tried to relent, they couldn't, as a route 1 goal kick from Neuer ran all the way through for Miroslav Klose to open the scoring, and things got doubly bad for the Three Lions as Podolski's left-footed sizzler made it 2-0 at the half-hour mark. However, England showed good fight in this one and halved the deficit 5 minutes later as a quick corner was floated in towards a foray of England bodies, and the surprising victor was Matthew Upson, who nodded home. But just as hope was emerging from the darkness, one of the World Cup's most controversial moments ensued. Lampard's rather audacious lob on Neuer bounced off the crossbar and over the line before Neuer attempted to rescue it. It was clear to every person in attendance that England had levelled the game, except the officials who ruled the ball didn't cross the line. It was a howler of a decision, one that sent shockwaves across the footballing world. The legacy of this was the introduction of goal line technology, but England had paid a massive price at the time as they went into the second half losing when they should have been level. A Thomas Muller second half brace would compound England to a 4-1 defeat, knocking them out with a whimper. A summer of such promise under Capello's leadership had dramatically sunk without so much of a trace. As the dust settled, the spotlight on Capello's management of this England side was duly debated. Whilst he had been unshakable during qualification, the tournament itself had been an unmitigated disaster. The Three Lions had been undeniably dreadful in 2010, a shell of themselves, and I think it came down to a few issues. Firstly was the inflexible tactics. The vast bulk of these players were not regularly playing in a 4-4-2, and the rigidity of this system clearly did not play to the team or the individual's strengths. Elsewhere, injuries and fitness concerns plagued the side throughout, coupled with the sudden change in the goalkeeping position caused a real lack of synergy within the side. As much as it's easy to level the majority of these criticisms at the manager, the players had to take a fair share of the blame too. Many had woefully underperformed at the tournament, and the fractions within the dressing room were certainly unbecoming of a nation attempting to win the World Cup. But this video is about Fabio Capello's reign as England manager, and as much as I want to be respectful about the Italian's great achievements in the beautiful game, it's no question that his stint in charge of the Three Lions was utterly bizarre. At best, it was a clear culture clash that, while successful in the short term, was clearly not a long-term tonic for this England side. And at worst, well, it was fucking weird. The banning of ketchup and butter from an Englishman's diet is sacrilege, and the complete shutout of the players' families from camp was too far in the other direction. Wags had dominated the landscape in the 2006 World Cup, partially aiding in England's poor performance, but Capello had flipped this 180 and caused the issue to remain on the other side of the spectrum. In spite of all of this though, Capello remained as England manager, overseeing another qualification cycle that saw England qualify for Euro 2012. Many of the successes and failures of Fabio's regime were still visible throughout. However, he wouldn't end up leading England into another tournament, as he promptly resigned in February of 2012 following a bust-up with the FA, as John Terry was once again stripped of the captaincy following alleged racial abuse from the Chelsea man directed at Rio Ferdinand's brother Anton in a match versus Queen's Park Rangers. Capello felt that the decision as to whether Terry remained as captain should have been his, and he resigned as a result. Roy Hodgson would be the man to succeed Fabio, who led England on his own baffling journey of confusion and unperformance over the next 4 years. And if you want to see a video on Roy and this England side, drop a comment below. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again on this journey. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.